Greetings to all of you. Warm Advent blessings, my dear sisters and brothers and my dear friends. This is your Pastor Yeti. Week 3. A time to heal. The third Sunday of Advent. Jesus and John the Baptist. Matthew 11, verses 1 to 11. So when Jesus has finished giving instructions to the 12 disciples, he moved on from there to teach and preach in their towns. Meanwhile, John, who was in prison, heard about these messianic goings-on. He sent word through his followers. "Are you the one who is coming?" he asked. "Or should we be looking for someone else?" "Go and tell John," replied Jesus, "what you've seen and heard. Blind people are seeing, lame people are walking, people with virulent skin diseases are being cleansed. Deaf people can hear again, the dead are being raised to life, and the poor are hearing the good news. And God bless you if you're not upset by what I'm doing." As the messengers were going away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. "What were you expecting to see," he asked, "when you went out into the desert? A reed wobbling in the wind? No. Well, then what were you expecting to see? Someone dressed in silk and satins? If you want to see people like that, you'd have to go to somebody royal places. Palace. All right. So what were you expecting to see? A prophet? Oh, no, we're getting there. Just indeed, and much more than a prophet. This is the one the Bible was talking about when it says, 'See, I'm sending my messenger ahead of you, and he will clear your path before you.' I'm telling you the truth. John the Baptist is the greatest mother's son there ever was. But even the least significant person in heaven's kingdom is greater than he is." Throughout this chapter, Jesus is dealing with the fact that what he is doing is not what people were expecting him to do. He knows it, is facing it, and believes that this is the way to go, the way to bring in God's kingdom, even though this isn't what others had imagined. The trouble is, though, that in terms of the illustration, the other actors aren't necessarily getting the message, and the audience is getting puzzled. Later in the chapter, we'll see how the people in his own town of Capernaum were getting the wrong idea and refusing to go along with his new interpretation of what God's kingdom would be like. But we begin with something that must have been even harder for Jesus to bear. His own cousin and colleague was having doubts. Had Jesus forgotten the script? Hadn't he remembered what he was supposed to be doing? John, we recall, was in prison. Matthew had already mentioned this, and will tell the story more fully in chapter 14, the verses 3 to 12. King Herod had taken exception to John's fiery preaching, and practically to his denunciation of him for marrying his brother's ex-wife. He was all part of John's announcements that God's kingdom and God's true king were on the way. Herod wasn't the real king. God would replace him. No wonder Herod put him in prison. But now in prison, John was disappointed. He heard about what Jesus was doing, and it didn't sound at all like the show he thought they'd rehearsed. He was expecting Jesus to be a man of fire, an Elijah-like character who would sweep through Israel as Elijah had dealt with the prophets of Baal, the pagan god many Israelites worshipped instead of Yahweh. No doubt, John looked forward eagerly to the day, not long now, when Jesus would confront Herod himself, topple him from his throne, become king in his place, and get his cousin out of prison and give him a place of honor. But it seemed as though Jesus was working to a different script altogether. Matthew refers to what Jesus was doing as his messianic deeds. But part of the point is that John didn't see them like that. Jesus was going around befriending tax collectors and sinners, people whom strict Jews were regarded as outsiders, not keeping the Torah properly. He was gaining a great reputation, but not for doing what John wanted him to do. What was going on? Had John been mistaken? Was Jesus, after all, the one who was to come? The one the play demanded? The one written into the script John thought they were acting out? Yes and no. Jesus believed. And Matthew wants us to get this clear, that he really was the one who was to come. He really was the Messiah. But he had rewritten the key bit of the play, to the surprise and consternation of the other actors and the audience as well. He was going back to a different script, a different kind of story. He wasn't thinking of himself in terms of Elijah calling down fire from heaven. He was thinking of passages like Isaiah 35, the great prophecies of what would happen when Israel was not so much judged and condemned, but restored after judgment. Exile will be over. The blind and the lame would be healed. God's people would be set free at last. Jesus is actually one jump ahead in the storyline of where John thinks he should be. John wants him to bring judgment, and so, in a sense, he will. But already the mercy which comes after judgment, the healing which comes after the time of sorrow, is breaking in, and it's Jesus' job to bring it. This, according to Jesus and Matthew, is the Messiah's main task. Actually, Jesus wasn't the only one at the time who thought the Messiah would do things like this. In one of the Dead Sea Scrolls found at Qumran, there's a passage which predicts that when the Messiah comes, he will heal the sick, raise the dead, bring good news to the poor, and so on. The difference is that Jesus was actually doing these things, just as wicked people don't like the message of judgment, because they think rightly that it's aimed at them. So sometimes good people don't like the message of mercy, because they think wrongly that people are going to get away with wickedness. But mercy was at the heart of Jesus' messianic mission, just as it remains at the heart of the church work today. Whether or not that's the script people want us to follow, that's the way we've got to go. And Jesus invokes a special blessing on people who realize that this is the true story, which turns into a code warning to those who are puzzled, including poor John himself. This is where and how God is at work. Those who recognize it and are not offended because they were expecting something else will know God's blessing. Here's something to reflect on. How can you show God's mercy? What can the church do to show mercy to the world? Let the God of mercy and grace embrace you. This is your Pastor Yeti.